Chapter 2: The Path of Power. As but few readers may be expected to have sufficient acquaintance with ancient philosophy and the rather detailed knowledge of psychophysiology necessary for even a superficial survey of the apocalypse, a brief sketch will here be given of the topics which must be entered into in interpreting it. A comprehensive treatise, or even a complete outline of the subject, would be far beyond the scope of the present work, which is strictly limited to the elucidation of the apocalypse. The point where the arcane system sharply diverges from all the conventional schools of thought is in the means of acquiring knowledge. To make this clear, Plato's analysis of the four faculties of the soul, with their four corresponding degrees of knowledge, may be taken (Rep. v. I. 511), tabulated it as follows: The visible, sensuous world. 1. Eukasia, perception of images. 2. Pistis, faith, psychic groping, both pertaining to dotcha, opinion, illusory knowledge. The intelligible suprasensuous world. 3. Dianoia, philosophic reason. 4. Gnosis, direct cognition, both pertaining to episteme, wisdom, true knowledge. The first of these degrees covers the whole field of the inductive physical sciences, which are concerned with investigating the phenomena of external nature. The second degree embraces exoteric, religion and all phases of blind belief, and these two degrees, pertaining to the phrenic or lower mind, comprise all the knowledge available to those whose consciousness does not transcend the illusions of the material world. The third degree relates to speculative philosophy, which seeks to arrive at first principles by the effort of pure reason. The fourth degree is the direct apprehension of truth by the lucid mind independently of any reasoning process. And these two degrees, pertaining to the noetic or higher mind, represent the field of knowledge open to those whose consciousness rises to the world of spiritual reality. Elsewhere, Plato speaks of the mantic state, which he describes as a kind of madness produced, quote, by a divine release from the ordinary ways of men. The exoteric scientist and religionist rely on the physical senses, the psychic emotions, and the intellectual faculties, as these are in the present stage of human evolution. And while the scientist somewhat enlarges the scope of the senses by employing the telescope, the microscope, and other mechanical devices, the religionist puts his trust in the mutilated records of suppositional revelations received from the remote past. But the esotericist, refusing to be confined within the narrow limits of the senses and the mental faculties, and recognizing that the gnostic powers of the soul are hopelessly hampered and obscured by its imperfect instrument, the physical body, devotes himself to what may be termed intensive self-evolution, the conquest and utilization of all the forces and faculties that lie latent in that fontal essence within himself, which is the primary source of all the elements and powers of his being, of all that he is, has been, and will be. By gaining conscious control of the hidden potencies, which are the proximate causes of his individual evolution, he seeks to traverse in a comparatively brief period of time the path leading to spiritual illumination and liberation from terrestrial bondage, rushing forward, as it were, towards that goal which the human race as a whole, advancing at an almost imperceptible rate of progress, will reach only after aeons of time. His effort is not so much to know as to become, and herein lies the tremendous import of the Delphic inscription, quote, "Know thyself," which is the keynote of esotericism. For the esotericist understands that true self-knowledge can be attained only through self-development in the highest possible sense of the term, a development which begins with introspection and the awakening of creative and regenerative forces which now slumber in man's inner protoplasmic nature, like the vivific potency in the ovum, and which, when roused into activity, transform him ultimately into a divine being, bodied in a deathless ethereal form of ineffable beauty. This process of transcendental self-conquest, the giving birth to oneself as a spiritual being, evolving from the concealed essence of one's own embryonic nature, a self-luminous immortal body, is the sole subject matter of the Apocalypse, as it is also the burden of the four Evangels. But whereas in his Evangel, Johannes has been content to follow the form of statement found in the three synoptics, in the Apocalypse he has given an almost complete outline of the psychophysiological process of regeneration, or, as he calls it in his Evangel, the birth, quote, from above. In the esoteric philosophy, the infelicitous word esoteric, being used in this work merely because the English language appears to afford no happier one, the absolute deity is considered to be beyond the spheres of existence and ulterior to being itself. The world of true being is that of the Logos, or Nous, the realm of divine ideas, or archetypes, which are the eternal patterns, so to say, of all things in the manifested universe. By a paradox which defies the reasoning faculty, but which is readily resolved intuitively, the God is said to be apart from and independent of the universe, and yet to permeate every atom of it. The God is the abstract unit, which is the origin of all number, but which never loses its unit value and cannot be divided into fractions, while the Logos is the manifested or collective unit, a deific individuality, the collectivity of a countless host of logoi who are differentiated into seven hierarchies, constituting in the aggregate the second logos, the uttered thought or word. As a mediate principle for the manifestation of the logos in and from the God, Johannes in his Evangel places the archeus, the first element or substratum of substantive objectivity, that which becomes by differentiation, first the subtle and then the gross material elements of the manifested worlds. If this primary substance is related back to the God and considered as being prior to the Logos, the result is the refined dualism that mars some of the old systems of philosophy. But in the prologue, the Logos is really coeval with the archeus. The Logos is, subsists in the archeus, and the latter becomes in the Logos the principle of life, which irradiates as light. This light of the Logos is identical with the pneuma, the breath or Holy Spirit, and esoterically, it is the pristine force which underlies matter in every stage and is the producer of all the phenomena of existence. It is the one force from which differentiate all the forces in the cosmos. As specialized in the human organism, it is termed in the New Testament the Parakletos, the quote, advocate, and is the regenerative force above referred to. From the archetypal world, that of the Logos, emanate successfully the psychic and the material worlds, and to these three may be added a fourth, which is usually included by ancient writers in the psychic, though in reality it is distinct from it. This fourth world, which will here be called the phantasmal, since the word, quote, hell connotes misleading and lurid notions, is the region of phantoms, evil spirits, and psychic garbage generally. All that the universe contains is contained also in man. The origin of man is in the deity, and his true self or individuality is a logos, a manifested God, analogous with the universe or macrocosm, man. The microcosm has three bodies, which are called in the New Testament the spiritual body, soma pneumatikon, the psychic body, soma psychikon, and the physical body, soma or sarch, quote, flesh. In the Upanishads, they are termed, quote, causal body, karanya sharira, quote, subtle body, sukshma sharira, and quote, gross body, Shathula Sharira. In mystical writings, they are made to correspond to the four occult elements, and also to the sun, moon, and earth, and hence are given the names air body, water body, fire body, lunar body, and solar body. The spiritual, pneumatic body is, strictly speaking, not a body at all, but only an ideal archetypal form, ensphered, as it were, by the pneuma, or primordial principle, which in the duality of manifestation generates all forces and elements. It is therefore called the quote, causal body, because from its sphere all the other bodies are engendered, and all these lower forms are enveloped by the same circumambient aura, called in the New Testament, quote, the radiance, or quote, glory, he docha, which is visible to the seer as an oviform, faint film of bluish haze. Semi-latent within this pneumatic ovum is the paraclete, the light of the Logos, which in energizing becomes what may be described as living, conscious electricity of incredible voltage and hardly comparable to the form of electricity. Known to the physicist, this is the quote, good serpent of ancient symbology, and taken with the pneumatic ovum, it was also represented in the familiar symbol of the egg and the serpent. It is called in the Sanskrit writings Kundalini, the annular or ring form force, and in the Greek speremma, the serpent coil. It is this force which, in the Telestic work, or cycle of initiation, weaves from the primal substance of the auric ovum upon the ideal form or archetype it contains, and conforming thereto, the immortal Ogordius, or solar body, Soma Helicon, so called because in its visible appearance it is self-luminous like the sun and has a golden radiance. Its aureola displays a filmy opalescene, this solar body of atomic non-molecular substance, the psychic or lunar body through which the nous acts in the psychic world, is molecular in structure, but a far finer substance than the elements composing the gross physical form to whose organism it closely corresponds, having organs of sight, hearing, and the rest. In appearance it has a silvery lustre, tinged with delicate violet, and in its aura is of palest blue, with an interchanging play of all the prismatic colours, rendering it iridescent. The physical body, in its physiological relation to psychology, will necessarily have to be considered somewhat in detail in elucidating the apocalypse. But before entering on this subject, it may be explained that a fourth body is sometimes alluded to in mystical writings. It is called in Sanskrit Kama Rupa, the form engendered by lust, and it comes into existence only after the death of the physical body. Save in the exceptional case of the extremely evil sorcerer, who, though alive physically, has become morally dead. It is a phantasm shaped from the dregs and effluvia of matter by the image creating power of the gross animal mind. Of such nature are the daemones and, quote, unclean spirits of the New Testament, where also the, quote, abominable stench, bedelugma, seems to be a covert allusion to this malodorous shade. This phantasm has the shadowy semblance of the physical body from which it was derived, and is surrounded by a cloudy aura of brick red hue. It should be observed that in the esoteric cosmogony, the theory of, quote, dead matter has no place. The universe is a manifestation of life, of consciousness, from the logos down to the very atoms of material elements. But in this philosophy, a sharp distinction is made between being and existence. The logos, the archetypal world, is that of true being, changeless and eternal, while existence is going outward into the worlds of becoming, of ceaseless change and transformation. The nous, the immortal man, or mind, for the mind should be regarded as the real man, when incarnated, comes under the sway of this law of mutation, entering upon a long cycle of incarnations, passing from one mortal body to another. The metaphysical aspect of this subject need not be discussed here, but it may be said that the fact of reincarnation, so far from being mysterious and difficult of proof, is very prosaic and simple, so that it has always been treated as exoteric in all archaic religions and philosophies. Positive knowledge of its truth on a basis of personal experience is one of the first results obtained by anyone who enters upon the initial stages of self-conquest. It is then a fact as apparent to him as are the cognate facts of birth and death. The Telestic work has for its object to achieve deliverance from reincarnation, and this deliverance is complete and final only when the deathless solar body is formed, and the perfected man is thereby freed from the necessity of reincarnating in the mortal physical and psychic forms. The physical body may itself be considered to be an objective microcosm, an epitome of the material world, to every department of which its organs and functions correspond and are in direct relation. Moreover, as the organism through which the soul contacts external nature, its organs correspond to and are the respective instruments of the powers and faculties of the soul. Thus, the body has four principal life centers, which are, roughly speaking, analogous of the four worlds and of the four manifested genetic powers of the soul. These four somatic divisions are as follows. 1. The head or brain is the organ of the nous, or higher mind. 2. The region of the heart including all the organs above the diaphragm, is the seat of the lower mind, phren, or thumos, including the psychic nature. 3. The region of the navel is the center of the passional nature, epithumia, comprising the emotions, desires, appetites, and passions. 4. The procreative center is the seat of the vivifying forces on the lowest plane of existence. This center is often ignored by ancient writers, as, for instance, Plato, who assigns 4 faculties to the soul, but classifies only 3 to the somatic divisions, assigning the nous or logos to the head, thumos to the cardiac region, and epithumia to the region below the midriff. Others, however, give the fourfold system, as does Philolaus the Pythagorean, who placed the seat and germ, arche, of reason in the head, that of the psychic principle in the heart, that of growth and germination in the navel, and that of seed and generation in the sexual parts. It is unnecessary, in this brief sketch, to go into further details concerning these correspondences, save only in regard to the nervous system and the forces operating through it. There are 2 nervous structures, the cerebrospinal, consisting of the brain and the spinal cord, and the sympathetic or ganglionic system. These 2 structures are virtually distinct, yet intimately associated in their ramifications. The sympathetic system consists of a series of distinct nerve centers, or ganglia, small masses of vascular neurine, extending on each side of the spinal column from the head to the coccyx. Some knowledge of these ganglia and the forces associated with them is indispensable in an examination into the meaning of the apocalypse, and as their occult nature is more fully elucidated in the Upanishads than in any other available ancient works, the teaching therein contained will here be referred to, and their Sanskrit terms employed. The ganglia are called chakras, quote, discs, and 49 of them are counted, of which the 7 principal ones are the following. 1. Sacral ganglion, Muladhara. 2. Prostatic, Adhistana. 3. Epigastric, Manipuraka. 4. Cardiac, Anyahata. 5. Pharyngeal, Vishuddhi. 6. Cavernous, Ajna. And 7. The cornarium, Sahasrara. Of these, only the 7th, the cornarium or pineal gland, need be considered here with particularity. It is a small, conical, dark grey body situated in the brain immediately behind the extremity of the 3rd ventricle, in a groove between the nates, and above a cavity filled with the sebulous matter composed of phosphate and carbonate of lime. It is supposed by modern anatomists to be the vestige of an atrophied eye, and hence is termed by them, quote, the unpaired eye. Though atrophied physically, it is the organ of spiritual vision when its higher function is restored by the vivifying force of the spirema or paraklete, and it is therefore called esoterically, quote, the third eye, the eye of the seer. When through the action of man's spiritual will, whether by his conscious effort or unconsciously, so far as his phrenic mind is concerned, the latent kundalini, spirema, which in the Upanishads is poetically said to lie coiled up like a slumbering serpent, is aroused to activity. It displaces the slow-moving nervous force or neuricity and becomes the agent of the telestic or perfecting work. As it passes from one ganglion to another, its voltage is raised, the ganglia being like so many electric cells coupled for intensity. And moreover, in each ganglion or chakra, it liberates and partakes of the quality peculiar to that center, and is then said to, quote, conquer the chakra. In Sanskrit mystical literature, very great stress is laid upon this, quote, conquering of the chakras. The seven principal ganglia: cavernous, cornereum, pharyngeal, cardiac, midriff, epigastric, prostatic, sacral. The path of power. The currents of the Kundalini, as also the channels they pursue, are called nadis, quote, pipes or tubes, and the three principal ones are 1. Sushumna, which passes from the terminus of the spinal cord to the top of the cranium at a point termed the Brahmarandra, or, quote, door of Brahma. In early Christian mysticism, Thura Yesu, quote, door of Jesus. 2. Pingala, which corresponds to the right sympathetic, and 3. Ida, which corresponds to the left sympathetic. The force, as specialized in the ganglionic system, becomes the seven tattvas, which in the Apocalypse are called the seven pneumata, quote, breaths, since they are differentiations of the great breath, the, quote, world mother, symbolized by the moon. Concurrent with these seven lunar forces are five solar forces pertaining to the cerebro-spinal system, called the five pranas, quote, vital airs, or, quote, life winds, which in the Apocalypse are termed, quote, winds, anemoi. The Apocalypse represents these 12 forces, the seven, quote, breaths, and the five, quote, winds, as corresponding to the 12 signs of the zodiac, of which, therefore, a brief description will here be appropriate. The zodiac is a belt of the celestial sphere, about 17 degrees in breadth, containing the 12 constellations, which the sun traverses during the year in passing around the ecliptic. Within this zone are confined the apparent motions of the moon and major planets. The zodiacal circle was divided by the ancients into 12 equal portions called signs, which were designated by the names of the constellations, then adjacent to them in the following order: Aries, the ram; Taurus, the bull; Gemini, the twins; Cancer, the crab; Leo, the lion; Virgo, the virgin; Libra, the balance; Scorpio, the scorpion; Sagittarius, the bowman; Capricornus, the goat; Aquarius, the water bearer; and Pisces, the fishes. Owing to the precession of the equinoxes, the signs of the ecliptic are now about one place ahead of the corresponding zodiacal constellations, which constitute the fixed zodiac. Aside from its astronomical utility, the scheme of the zodiac was employed to symbolize the relations between the macrocosm and the microcosm, each of the 12 signs being made to correspond to one of the 12 greater gods of the ancient pantheon and assigned as the quote, house of one of the 7 sacred planets. Each sign, moreover, being said to govern a particular portion of the human body, as shown in the familiar esoteric chart here reproduced. The foregoing covers the topics which must necessarily be referred to in elucidating the recondite meaning of the apocalypse, but to convey a clearer conception of its practical and psychological application, further explanation will now be given of the action of the quote, serpent force, spirema, in the telestic or perfective work. This work has to be preceded by the most rigid purificatory discipline, which includes strict celibacy and abstemiousness, and it is possible only for the man or woman who has attained a very high state of mental and physical purity. To the man who is gross and sensual, or whose mind is sullied by evil thoughts or constricted by bigotry, the holy Paraclete does not come. The unpurified person who rashly attempts to invade the adytum of his inner God can arouse only the lower psychic forces of his animal nature, forces which are cruelly destructive and never regenerative. The neophyte, who has acquired the quote, purifying virtues, before entering upon the systematic course of introspective meditation by which the spiritual forces are awakened, must also, as a necessary preliminary, gain almost complete mastery of his thoughts, with the ability to focus his mind undeviatingly upon a single detached idea or abstract concept, excluding from the mental field all associated ideas and irrelevant notions. If successful in this mystic meditation, he eventually obtains the power of arousing the spirema, or paraclete, and can thereby at will enter into the state of manteya, the sacred trance of seership. The four mantic states are not psychic trances or somnambulic conditions. They pertain to the noetic, spiritual nature, and in every stage of the manteia, complete consciousness and self-command are retained, whereas the psychic trances rarely transcend the animalistic phrenic nature and are usually accompanied by unconsciousness or semi-consciousness. Proficiency in the noetic contemplation, with the arousing of the sperema and the conquest of the life centers, leads to knowledge of spiritual realities, the science of which constitutes the gnosis, and the acquirement of certain mystic powers, and it culminates in emancipation from physical existence through the quote, birth from above, when the deathless solar body has been fully formed. This telestic work requires the unremitting effort of many years, not in one life only, but carried on through a series of incarnations until the final result is achieved. But almost in its initial stages, the consciousness of the aspirant becomes disengaged from the mortal phrenic mind and centered in the immortal noetic mind, so that from incarnation to incarnation his memory carries over more or less clearly according to the degree he has attained. The knowledge acquired, and with this unbroken memory and certainty of knowledge, he is in truth immortal, even before his final liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. In arousing the Kundalini by conscious effort in meditation, the Sushumna, though it is the all important force, is ignored, and the mind is concentrated upon the two side currents, for the Sushumna cannot be energized alone, and it does not start into activity until the Ida and the Pingala have preceded it, forming a positive and a negative current along the spinal cord. These two currents, on reaching the sixth chakra, situated back of the nasal passages, radiate to the right and left, along the line of the eyebrows. Then the Sushumna, starting at the base of the spinal cord, proceeds along the spinal marrow, its passage through each section thereof corresponding to a sympathetic ganglion, being accompanied by a violent shock or rushing sensation due to the accession of force, increased quote, voltage, until it reaches the conarium and thence passes outwards through the Brahmarandra, the three currents thus forming a cross in the brain. In the initial stage, the seven psychic colours are seen, and when the Sushumna impinges upon the brain, there follows the lofty consciousness of the seer, whose mystic quote, third eye now becomes, as it has been poetically expressed, quote, a window into space. In the next stage, as the brain centers are successfully, quote, raised from the dead by the serpent force, the seven, quote, spiritual sounds are heard in the tense and vibrant aura of the seer. In the succeeding stage, sight and hearing become blended into a single sense, by which colours are heard and sounds are seen. Or to word it differently, colour and sound become one, and are perceived by a sense that is neither sight nor hearing, but both. Similarly, the psychic senses of taste and smell become unified, and next the two senses thus reduced from the four are merged in the interior, intimate sense of touch, which in turn vanishes into the epistemonic faculty, the gnostic power of the seer, exalted above all sense perception, to cognize eternal realities. This is a sacred trance, called in Sanskrit samadhi, and in Greek manteia, and in the ancient literature of both these languages, four such trances are spoken of. These stages of seership, however, are but the beginning of the Telestic labour, the culmination of which is, as already explained, rebirth in the imperishable solar body. As the Apocalypse has its sole theme this spiritual rebirth, it should now be apparent why that book has ever been unintelligible to the conventional theologian, and has never yielded its secrets to the mere man of letters.